Good evening. My name is Betsy Stites, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the League of Women Voters, and not just from Woodbury Cottage Grove, but we are co-hosting with the White Bear Lake League of Women Voters. So you've got two of us that are really welcome you this evening, and I'm just so glad you're here. Just a reminder about who this league is. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. We have a vision where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. And especially like things with redistricting and the election, the school board elections coming up, it's really important to be informed. We believe in the power of women and men to create a more perfect democracy. One of the things I always like to do is to really reinforce our nonpartisan position. We are neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. So I would like to turn it over to Andrea. And as I've said, we're co-hosting with the League of Women Voters from White Bear Lake, and that's especially exciting because with all our leagues, we want to speak with one voice. And so we have a wonderful opportunity this evening to hear from Jennifer and also from Paul. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Hobley, who is our Vice President in charge of programming, who will be our moderator this evening. Andrea?
Thank you, Betsy. Well, welcome to our program this evening. We're going to have an update on Washington County redistricting process of what you need to know now. We will have two speakers tonight, and we will have time for questions at the end of each part of the program. Our first speaker is the Washington County Deputy Administrator, Jennifer Wigenius, and then we'll have Paul Huffman, who is the Redistricting Coordinator for the League of Women Voters, Minnesota, and is also a member of our Woodbury Cottage Grove Area League. And he will have an update from our state league. Some housekeeping items first. We want to let you know that our Q&A is open. So we welcome your questions. I will hold on to the questions and ask them after each speaker. So if you type something into the Q&A, we will hold, for questions for Jennifer until the end of her program. Then we'll have a brief Q&A, and then we'll have Paul's program, and then Q&A after Paul's program. There are also a few county commissioners who have joined us this evening, and they're also available for questions after Jennifer's presentation as well, if we have any questions that are applicable for them to answer. I wanted to just also mention that we will have a call to action regarding redistricting principles for the county, and I will have some more information about that at the end of the program, but that's something you may want to keep in mind while you listen to the speakers. I believe that Jennifer will have some information about a period for public comment that the county will have coming up soon. And then I also lastly wanted to let you know that the program this evening will run probably a bit over an hour. It kind of depends on how many questions we get, but just if you're planning your evening, we may go until about 8:15 or so. Just totally up to you and how much information you guys want to ask about after each speaker. And with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Jennifer Wigenius with Washington County.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being with us tonight. Let me just get my PowerPoint going here for you this evening. Okay, I think we're set. Thank you, Andrea, for the nice introduction. It was great to meet you and hear a little bit from you and Betsy and Paul and Vivian before we got started. So thank you for that time this evening. Appreciate the invitation tonight. Again, my name is Jennifer Wigenius, and I'm one of the county's deputy administrators. And I'm one of the staff people that is working on redistricting here at Washington County. Just a little bit about myself. I am a longtime county employee. I've been with the county over 20 years and have been in my current role for about 2 years. Prior to this position, I worked in and led the department that is responsible for election administration, so I have some hands-on experience with elections as well. We'll start the conversation this evening with an introduction and overview of county services and county census data, followed by some general redistricting information, and then more specific information about the redistricting process the Washington County Board has outlined. Washington County has 5 commissioners that lead our organization. This map shows the geographic area of each of the existing county commissioner districts. Given that tonight's presentation was initiated by the Woodbury Cottage Grove League of Women Voters, I will start on the south side of the county and work my way up. Representing District 4, which includes Cottage Grove, a portion of Woodbury, and a few smaller communities, is Commissioner Wayne Johnson. Commissioner Johnson was elected in November of 2018. Next, representing most of Woodbury in District 5 is our second most tenured commissioner, Commissioner Lisa Wyke. Commissioner Wyke was first elected in 2008, and she currently serves as the board chair, a position that our commissioners have rotated on an annual basis. Then representing District 2 is Commissioner Stan Karwowski. Commissioner Karwowski was first elected in 2016. He represents a portion of Woodbury, all of Oakdale, and a few other smaller communities. And Commissioners Wyke, Karwowski, and Johnson are joining us at this meeting tonight. Moving then to the east, in District 3 is our longest serving commissioner, Commissioner Gary Kriesel, who was first elected in 2004 and who serves most of the river communities. And finally, representing District 1 is Commissioner Fran Miron, whose district includes Hugo and Forest Lake. He was first elected to the county board in 2012. Neither Commissioner Miron or Kriesel could participate this evening. They both had local municipality meetings that they're attending, but they do send their regards and thank you for the opportunity. County government is sometimes referred to as an invisible layer of government, but we are impacting lives in a lot of ways. So I just want to take a few minutes tonight to summarize some of the services that we provide. In many cases, the work we do is mandated by either the state or federal government. Government's first goal is to protect the health, well-being, and safety of our residents and clients. In that space, the county prosecutes crimes, provides patrol and dispatch, probation, or community corrections services, safety net services, including food support, healthcare, and employment help, child and adult protection services, and services for those with disabilities. There are also economic support services for those that need a hand up. The county protects safety through our quality roads and infrastructure as well. And in addition to the public health role of the county, which has been front and center for the last year and a half, the county provides health and well-being through our parks and libraries, as well as our environmental programs. Finally, our county's Property Records and Taxpayer Services Department has most direct contact with our residents, given their responsibility for licensing, real estate records, taxes, and elections. And behind the scenes, of course, our internal services departments are supporting all of that work. Though what we do is typically mandated, we have some leeway in how we deliver our services. The county commissioners take very seriously their responsibility to provide quality services through the responsible use of public resources. The county's financial health is strong. For many years, Washington County has maintained a AAA bond rating, which is the highest credit rating available and has the second lowest tax rate in the metropolitan area. That means that the same valued home in almost any other metropolitan county would pay higher county property taxes. Financial measures alone do not tell the whole story. So in addition to department measures that continually identify and allow us to improve performance, the county uses system-wide measures such as our residential survey and our employee engagement surveys. In the 2019 residential survey, 95% of residents rated the quality of life in Washington County as good or excellent. Washington County is also very active with specific initiatives to remove barriers to service and evaluate our services with a lens of equity and inclusion. I think a lot of us were patiently or impatiently, for some of us, waiting for census data to be released. And we're still getting more specific data trickling in, but we do have some of the higher level data now. Over the last 10 years, Washington County was the third fastest growing of the 7 metropolitan counties at 12.4%, and the 5th fastest growing in the state, behind only Olmsted, Wright, Scott, and Carver counties. Based on Met Council projections for 2030 and 2040, that growth is expected to continue. Another data point that is now known is that the percentage of population in Washington County that identifies as a person of color grew nearly 8% from 2010 to 2020 census. Certainly, we are seeing racial or ethnic diversity growing statewide, but it is increasing at a higher rate within Washington County. Though we've had consistent growth in the county for several decades, the county overall, not all the communities within our county are growing at the same rate. I know this map is a little bit hard to read because there's a lot of data on it, but I think really the key concept is that those darker shades of green indicate higher growth. So you can see from this map that there is definitely a higher concentration of those shades in the western part of the county. There are a lot of different parties and deadlines involved as we move into the redistricting process, or the process of redrawing the boundaries of the election districts to ensure the people of each district are equally represented based on the decennial census data. For those of you who are well-versed in redistricting or who may have seen Commissioner Karwowski's presentation this spring, a few of these slides will be a review, but please bear with me for a minute so I can anchor us and provide a little bit of background here. The state's redistricting process starts after the census and after Congress decides how many seats each state has in the 435-member House of Representatives. That process, called apportionment, occurred in April when it was announced that Minnesota barely kept our 8 U.S. House seats. Knowing how many House seats we have, the state has the constitutional responsibility for redistricting congressional, state, and House Senate districts, as well as metropolitan council districts. And typically they would have been working on that during the 2021 legislative session. However, given the delay in release of the census data, that work could not occur. The state legislature is planning to go back into session early in 2022 to work on their redistricting tasks. If new maps have not been enacted though and signed by the governor by February 15th of 2022, then a special court redistricting panel will issue a final order declaring the existing maps unconstitutional, and that order will include new district maps. After the state finishes its work, our cities and townships must establish municipal precincts. The cities have about 6 weeks to complete their work, but if there are substantial delays in the earlier part of the redistricting process, their time could be as short as 28 days under existing rules. One of the rules that cities follow is that they cannot split congressional or legislative districts. And then finally, we come last. So the counties and other local governments follow the cities, and we have an even shorter period of time to do our redistricting tasks. We have less than a month. So this is just an overview of that whole redistricting schedule that I just went through. But you can see that overall, based on these dates, and then looking at history. So what does the timeline of the past redistricting look like? Given those pieces of data, we expect the county board will have a very compressed timeline to develop, get feedback on, and adopt new commissioner and soil and water conservation district maps. So let's move into the specifics of Washington County process that we are undertaking. There are several factors that determine if county commissioner districts are required to be updated, and the status of a lot of these is still unknown at this time. Within Washington County, though we don't know all of the factors that will impact our redistricting efforts, we do know that inconsistent growth throughout the county has resulted in commissioner districts that are no longer as nearly equal in population as possible. So our county board will need to undertake a redistricting process. Given that Washington County is currently split into 3 congressional districts and numerous state and House Senate districts, We do expect that rule that the precinct boundaries follow legislative and congressional districts will have an impact on our city precinct boundaries, which will then in turn have an impact on the county commissioner districts. Because the county board knows that Washington County must undertake a redistricting process and that the county's timeline for redistricting under the statutory process is compressed, they have indicated a desire to separate the process of developing and getting public feedback on redistricting principles from the process to redraw boundaries and get feedback on maps. So the proposed process you're seeing here includes a timeline to establish redistricting principles, which is identified here in the first 3 items on the timeline. That includes board action that we are planning for tomorrow, as well as meetings that we are currently scheduling to hold on November 30th and December 14th. And I add a few caveats in here because I do want to note the board is not taking official action on this until tomorrow. So we're all a little bit ahead of them, but the schedule that you're seeing here is consistent with the direction that I've been given so far. The process of adopting redistricting principles is not required by statute. However, it has been the tradition of the Washington County Board to establish guiding principles. The board process then to develop, post, get public input on, and adopt new district maps will occur in April of next year, with alternatives posted on the county website mid-April under this schedule, a public hearing on those options April 19th, and then finally board action on April 26th to establish new districts. Going back to redistricting principles, based on board discussion to date, these are the principles they will be reviewing at their board meeting tomorrow. All items on this slide are generally a restatement of Minnesota statutes on redistricting and reaffirm that the statutory requirements will be followed carefully. The first principle relates to the number of commissioner districts. Statute generally provides for county boards to have 5 commissioners. However, in counties with a population greater than 100,000, there is an option to increase the board to 7 members. When the proposed principles are posted on the county's website, a note will be added notifying the public of that opportunity. Population deviation refers to the rule that no district may vary by more than 10% from the average of all districts. State statute also requires that districts be contiguous and as regular and as compact as practical. The principle on the division of political subdivisions is not a statutory requirement for county redistricting, but does mimic a Minnesota statute related to state redistricting plans, which note that the legislature intends that within a redistricting plan, political subdivisions not be divided more than necessary to meet constitutional requirements. The public notice indicated on this slide also follows state statute. And the 3 items related to communities of interest, minority representation, and incumbents, while not required by statute, do generally follow principles used in the past by the Washington County Board and principles used by state redistricting panels. During a judicial redistricting panel hearing in Woodbury last week, judges were looking specifically to gather more information about the social and cultural interests that are harder to define or map in the category of preserving communities of interest. Our commissioners are intimately involved with each of their communities and will likely be a large voice in identifying those types of interests. Other items in that category are or will be available from the US Census and can then be mapped during our redistricting process in April. And finally here, the principle related to staggered terms really is related to internal logistics and for the public's information on how the logistics will follow around the assignment of 2-year commissioner terms after the redistricting process. As I mentioned, we're a little bit ahead of the county board today. And so after tomorrow's board meeting, I do expect to have a final version of proposed, if that's not an oxymoron, but a final version of the proposed principles that we will post on the county's website. And then starting on Wednesday, if you go to the county's main page and type redistricting in the search bar, you will be directed to our redistricting page, which includes the proposed principles as well as an opportunity to provide input electronically on those principles. Also, as I noted earlier, we are expecting to set a public hearing tomorrow that will be then held on November 30th, where you would be able to share your feedback on the principles in person as desired. This redistricting page will also be very active in April of next year as the board identifies and posts the maps of the redistricting alternatives. And that ends my formal presentation. I thank you for the opportunity and for the time you've given this to me this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'm going to end my slideshow and sharing right now so that I can see the questions a little bit better and interact with you all. Certainly these materials, the league does have them and can certainly be shared, because I know that was a lot of information and dates and deadlines that are hard to remember. Thank you again for the time this evening.
Jennifer, if you are okay with us putting the slides on our website, would that be okay?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so if anyone's looking for that information, we can put that up on our website. It's not going to be up immediately because our web person's on vacation, but our website is LVW, as in League of Women Voters, WCG, WoodburyCottageGrove.org. So one of the questions that we had is how are residential surveys distributed? The question says, I've lived in the county for over 25 years and haven't received one. So,
oh no. Well, so the residential surveys are distributed. We use a company and we work with other counties in the area so that we can compare the data as well. So this is definitely outside of my area of expertise, but they do a statistical sampling so that they can make sure that the data actually is reflective. Now, if you don't get a survey, that doesn't mean we don't want your input. We do tons of surveys just on our website, or you can get notifications. So we're always looking for feedback on our different library programs. We often do public health surveys. We're out in the community continually on our road projects looking for feedback. So formal surveys are certainly not, and our commissioners are out at public meetings continually looking for feedback as well. So that's one way to interact with us. But if you don't get a survey, we still want to hear from you. And so please reach out and share your feedback with us.
So it sounds like the formal survey is they're just taking a sampling of people. So it's just a luck of the draw kind of a thing.
That's correct.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So the other question I have is about testimony on redistricting. Is testimony accepted in person only, or can it be submitted in writing?
It can be submitted in writing. There's a couple ways you can do that. In our official notification, we'll have an email that you can send an email to the county for redistricting. You could also send something to me. But on our redistricting page, we have a form where you can comment, and then those comments will be shared with the public, with the county board, during our public hearing, first on the redistricting principles, and then we'll follow the same process in April when there's maps that are on our website.
Okay. I'm gonna, because we actually only have a few questions. So, I'm gonna ask this one and then I'll get back to, I have a couple of questions that I'll ask, but I'm gonna go through the audience questions first. Is there any consideration for hearings on redistricting in the evening so those who work can participate?
We have not set the schedule for 2022. The November 30th meeting is actually a late afternoon meeting. It's the same day as our public input on our budget. So that starts at 7 p.m. on November 30th, our public budget hearing, and the board meeting will be before that. So we will be having a late afternoon in-person hearing for the redistricting principles on November 30th. And then certainly appreciate that feedback. I can take that back as we're looking to set the board's calendar for 2022. We're also talking about our meetings are always televised. So you can go on our website and watch them live or watch them later as well. So that's one option to be able to engage with us if you have a work conflict or some other conflict with the board's meeting, whether it's during the day or in the evening. And then having some conversation about televising the workshops related to redistricting as well. So we definitely are looking for ways for the public to engage in this process.
Great. I was going to mention about the redistricting principles, because I touched on the previous discussion a bit, is that I think, so people have some context, is that counties don't have to adopt these, but it was something that Washington County had taken upon themselves to do in the last redistricting cycle. And I haven't been involved for long enough to know if maybe they had done it the time before that, but that I know that the Board of Commissioners had done that in 2012. And that was something that, as the league was looking into, we were really appreciative of that, because that is not required and that is not something that every county has to do. And so that's something that was a nice sort of starting off point for us, looking at how to engage with the county on redistricting. So if anyone's interested in those, you shared some information about those here. And we also have some on our website too, some proposed ones on our website. They actually are fairly similar to what was done before, with some additions for public comment and things like that, which it sounds like you guys have really built in here. So I think I actually have one other question. That's good. I'll get to this one, and then I still have one more of my own I've saved here. Okay. Oh, this is actually, it's a comment from Lisa, one of our commissioners. I'm wondering, would we want to just promote her to a panelist, Vivian? Would you want to promote her? Because then she can just go ahead and talk about this a little bit. She's asking for people to comment on the take the park survey, but maybe she could talk about that a little bit, because we do have time. So I'm going to ask yet another question then. Ramsey County has 7 commissioners plus staff. Washington County government is becoming more complex and demanding. What are the chances of increasing the board to 7 members? That was actually my other question. So
hello, Commissioner.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Yeah, actually the park survey, I just saw that on Twitter, I think late last week. I saw that post, so I figured I would share it in the chat so that you could all look at that.
So if anyone wants to take a survey, there is the park survey out on the website that you have, it looks like you have linked to. So yeah.
Thank you.
I'm gonna ask this question, and Lisa, you're welcome to stay on or turn off your video. And we talked about ahead of time, if any questions were directed to commissioners, that we could have you come on as a speaker. So you're welcome to jump in if you want to, but I'll leave that up to you. So this question was, again, the Ramsey County has 7 commissioners plus staff, and Washington County government is becoming more complex and demanding. What are the chances of increasing the board to 7 members?
Commissioner White, did you want to address that, or do you want me to start out? Or
Well, if you want to start out, I could jump in. I hate to jump in on something like that. It's a little bit more political. I know how I feel about it, but
that sounds good. I'll lay a baseline, and then so I think the answer is the board is looking for feedback on that, and that's one of the principles that we will be posting, and we're also actually putting an asterisk next to that one because we're looking for the public's feedback on it. The board has had a lot of discussion about what you're talking about in this question, as far as there definitely is a lot of complexity. Our board members are not just working when they're at a county board meeting. Each of them is in 5 or 7 other commissions where they're representing the county, where they're representing, it's on our recycling board, it's on our parks commission, it's, so they are wearing a lot of different hats, and they're really trying to balance, the increase of cost and the increase related to staff of adding commissioner districts versus the workload that they're trying to manage and making sure that they're serving the public the best they can. So they had asked me to originally post that. I mean, we'll see what the conversation is like tomorrow. So again, we're a little ahead of the board, but the initial version of the principles shows as 5. But there is an asterisk there with the notation that we are eligible for 7. And we're looking for public comment on that if that's something that the public feels strongly about.
And I was going to note that we do have our other two commissioners, and maybe it would be good to just, do you think we should just go ahead and promote them to be panelists as well in case they want to jump in on anything? I had the comment from Stan, Commissioner Kowalski, that he's available as well. So I don't know if they have anything to add, not necessarily on this question. I understand that's kind of touchy for them, but there we go. It looks like we're adding them in. Commissioner Johnson has joined us and Commissioner Kowalski. So again, I don't know if any of them have feedback on this question because as I said, it's a little bit touchy, but
Hi,
hi,
I
welcome.
could chime in. It is hard to answer questions when we're in the process of evaluating it. We really want to get the citizens' feedback before we get too opinionated. So I think by Jennifer, our deputy administrator, kind of laying out the ground rules. It's questions about the ground rules are good, but it's hard to each of us give our own opinion when we want to kind of preserve that for after resident feedback and other reasons. It's my opinion.
I can add in there too. And as Commissioner Wyke or Chair Wyke had said, we all kind of have our own viewpoints, but at the same time, we want to be careful without having other board members here also to provide their feedback at the same time. As soon as you say something, it's unfair to others to not give them the opportunity to feedback. So I just know that it has something we are reviewing, because as we know, when you have the census, that's your time so much is being reviewed at all levels of government, and it's your chance to look really big picture of where you are, where you're going, and then looking forward to, as we or the key thing is we want to be able to serve our constituents and be able to be accessible to them. And we have a very long county, which it makes it very challenging for just being able to drive. If you drive from where I'm in Cottage Grove, going up to Stillwater and then going up to Forest Lake, it's so with that said, it's as everything is under consideration right now, but without having other people be able to provide their feedback, it would be unfair for us to say anything right now. So.
Yeah, I definitely understand. There's just the question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, I was just going to say thank you, commissioners, and they built a lot of suspense, but really they really do mean they want to hear from you, from the public, and that question is out there for this redistricting cycle.
It looks like we have two other questions now. So commissioners, you're welcome to stay in here if you want to jump in. I haven't read them yet, so I don't know what the topics are, but I'll go ahead and read them and you guys can decide how the best way to answer them. This one looks like it might be more for Jennifer. What are the statistics regarding those surveys? There's a lot of questions about the surveys. How many individuals respond, or what percentage of individuals in the county respond? Are the surveys representative of the county population?
Yeah, and I think a couple of things related to this. So again, it is a statistical sampling, and we do make sure that the responses do mirror our population. So in some cases, even our survey company will recommend that we over survey certain populations so that what we get back is reflective of the community. We do have a page. If you go to our website and type in residential survey, it has the full report of the 2019 residential survey. So certainly invite everybody to take a look at that. We did, our response rate was about 31%, but it is very, very, an analyzed survey that has been found to be statistically valid. So yeah, just type in residential survey and you'll be able to see all of the reports, the presentation that we did on that, and that was in 2019. We're just getting ready to to get questions and work on our next survey. So maybe that's a topic for this group in a coming year or two once we get that back and get that information out to the residents as well. Oh, thank you, Andrea. Appreciate you posting that.
Yeah, I just did exactly what you said to Google and it came right up as the first result. So if anyone doesn't catch the link, I put it in the chat, but if anyone's looking on watching this on recording later, you can just search that and it's the top result. So, okay. One other question is, how do the various commissioners think, what do they think is the greatest challenge for the redistricting project ahead? Yeah.
I can start. Just two things really quickly. I would say it's the compressed timelines. With the delay with the census data, we will need to wait and follow the cities. The cities need to complete any updates to their voting precincts. We have 26 cities. I know I was on the board in 2012, the last time that this work was done, and I thought the timelines were tight back then, and now we're going to have an even shorter time to complete all that work and to have adequate time to have the draft maps, because it'll be, I know in 2012 we had 5 draft maps for the public to look at. I don't know yet. Obviously, we need to have the data run through GIS and some of the statistical modeling for us. But I think the second greatest challenge is the lack of local newspapers in Woodbury and Oakdale, especially. When there weren't newspapers in 2012, the Woodbury Bulletin did a lot of articles on the redistricting and actually showed, I believe, the different maps that were being considered. That really aids public input. So people may need to be a lot more proactive and go to Washington County's website and look at the maps and give us feedback.
I'm glad Commissioner White stepped up right away to answer that, because I was going to make that suggestion, being that she was here last time, and I know the other 2 commissioners would have been around too, I believe. So they're going to be providing us the experience and how to do that. And I agree. I have not been through that. I'm the newest member, but I think just the timeline from what I've heard in the past and how long it took, and when you take into consideration all the, you can't do this, you can't do that, and trying to make it all work, and trying to, with population, and also make sure, it doesn't burden one particular commissioner with territory even. That I think will be a very tough task, especially with the limited amount of time that it's going to be given to us. I can see we're going to be having a number of meetings in a very short period of time. And I get to be the fortunate one that's the chair that year. So it'll be a lot of fun. So
I would just concur the timeline as the critical thing. And then, because this will be, when I was elected in Oakdale, we didn't have to deal with any boundaries. We didn't have city council wards. So this is the first time for me. And so we have a tight timeline, not only the timeline, but making sure we all feel comfortable that we're doing the best boundaries for the citizens and that representation. And that's where it's nice to have Commissioner White's experience having been through it. Commissioner Kreisel having been through it. When we get down to those, it'll just be nice having that experience. And then we have staff to, help us. It's, just getting the boundaries right, that we all feel we're representing the citizens the very best we can. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions, but I am wondering if, as long as we have the commissioners on it, I don't know if you each have any sort of closing comments that you want to add in additional information, or just general thoughts for us. I mean, I think a good general question for us as community members is, what's the best way for us to engage with you in the process and feedback? I know we have the website, but what do you want to hear from us? Any sort of closing thoughts in addition to that?
I can just start off and to say, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you. I know how important the League of Women Voters is during both the election process and this, and how important it is to get the information out, because there seems to be less and less opportunity to do that as far as getting the information out. So if anybody has any questions, I know I have either Facebook or email or many different ways that I reach out with people in the different community, in the different cities and on pages. So just don't be afraid to ask, just reach out to us. We all, I know I'm going to speak of myself, respond as quickly as I can. And then also if we're out in the community, just come up to us and talk to us. And now is the time to ask, and so that would be my suggestion.
I would just add, I agree with Commissioner Johnson, and I think if you could formally put it in writing and articulate it, I think the League of Women Voters, with your nonpartisan spirit and your membership is very involved and caring. So I think your input, especially if it's written and carefully written, each one of us that are available for a call, and we'll take it if you live in our district, we'll receive that call. But I think just don't hold back any of your input. And then if there's questions, I think there'll be a time when the input might be questions, and there's probably going to be a vehicle to get back to you on that. Jennifer, how would that work as far as questions? The input would raise questions, and how do we get back?
Thank you, Commissioner. If there are questions that come in through that website, those will be routed to staff, and then staff will respond directly. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I agree with the other comments. This is a very important process. Obviously, it's only done once every 10 years. So the maps that are adopted with the public's input, will be in place for 10 years. So I think just to be able to get solid maps that are fair in an open and transparent process that will also take into consideration the ongoing population growth is going to be where art meets science, because that is, we've had a lot of growth, of course, in the last 10 years, but by 2030, I believe the projections are for Washington County to have a population of almost 310,000 people. So I think, Jennifer, where are we at? 275 right now, or 273? So to be up to 310, and especially along the western areas of the county, we have a lot of population density from north to south along the Ramsey County, well, it's Anoka, Ramsey, and Dakota County boundaries. We're such a long and narrow county that we have 3 metro counties to our west. But did you find the number, Jennifer?
Yes, Madam Chair, we're at 267, and you're correct. We're projected to go up to about 310 by 2030.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's an art meets science at that point, because there's lots of rules we're following.
But yeah, so again, your input is going to be critical. I think that you are all leaders, in your communities. I know even other community leaders look to your group for information. So my personal request is just that without a newspaper in Woodbury or Oakdale also lost Lilly News. Right there, those 2 cities are well over 100,000 people. So as much as the league can do to help us get the word out and for people to be informed, not only on the principles that we're going to be looking at, but also when we do get to the draft map phase, which again, we have to wait for the cities because we cannot divide their voting precincts. So we need to know if they're going to move any of their lines around before we can get too in depth on any draft maps to show the public. So clear your calendars for April, because that's when most of the heavy lifting will be done. And then of course the filing period opens May 17th. So we have all of these maps, even the Senate districts and stuff will be newly minted, like in February or March with the judiciary panel likely going to complete that work.
I have just a piggyback question. As we were talking, one more question came in and it's related to what you were just talking about. It is if there's a change in district boundaries, are all of the commissioners up for election?
That depends on a math formula that is also in statute. So that's a very good question. So that's part of the draft map process. So in 2012, when Commissioner Kriesel and I were on the board, we had maps A, B, C, D, and E, and we could do some different versions or slight variations if we kind of included some precincts or not in some of the cities. So, the various maps, the various main maps also showed the math calculation that showed which commissioners would need to run midterm with that map. So that is part of the information that is shared. And that's the information that would be available in April. So again, even in 2012, though, I think there were only maybe 5 weeks time instead of 2 or 3. But I think Wayne Johnson said it correctly. We're going to have a lot of meetings in a short amount of time. And if there's any, additional public meetings that the league might schedule, that might also be very helpful.
It's probably not fun to watch me do math, but as Chair Blake mentioned, there is a rule in statute, and you take the number of people that moved out of a district and the number that moved in, and if the people you represent has changed by more than 5%, the commissioner needs to run. So we'll definitely be watching that in this process as well.
All right, I see our other commissioners are back on their video. Do you have any other comments or just joining us for closing here?
I was just here closing, and I guess, and I don't know if it said any, or if that got said, but I am up, just, or I guess naturally, I believe Stan is up naturally too. So we would be up regardless of what numbers happen, and it's just the decision is on the other commissioners. So
okay. Let's see. Oh, Paul, did you have a comment during this period? Otherwise, we'll be going into your part of the program in a couple minutes or in a minute.
That's it.
Okay. All right. So I think that is it. So we have Paul's part of the program next, but what we like to do is, our commissioners are welcome to stay with us. We'll just let you guys go off video if there's nothing else to say. I don't know if Jennifer, if you had any sort of closing comments, otherwise we'll let Paul go into his part of the program.
I want to hear from Paul, but thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Yeah, wonderful. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll leave you here just in case there's any questions. Just for the audience, we'll have Paul will do his program, and then we'll have another Q&A for Paul's because it's a little bit of a different topic. But Jennifer's going to stay with us, and everyone else feel free to continue on and watch. So, all right, thank you so much, Jennifer.
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to the commissioners who joined us tonight. It's really helpful to hear your point of view on this as well. All right, I want to welcome Paul Huffman. He's with League of Women Voters Minnesota and also a member of our local league, Woodbury Cottage Grove area. And he has a program, an update for us on the state redistricting program, People Powered Fair Maps. All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Andrea. And what I was going to do is talk a little bit about what our resources are, our suggestions on local redistricting. And you heard a lot from the commissioners and from Ms. Wagenius about the county's process and the different communities. So I'll go through some of this fairly quickly in the interest of time. So just some facts, every county does redistricting. We do have 3 cities with wards in Washington County that also have to redistrict: Stillwater, Afton, and Hugo. Every city has precincts, and that can all be a little confusing about precincts versus wards. And so, just to be aware that once a legislative, like folks said, once a legislative and congressional boundaries are defined, then the precinct boundaries are reviewed and changed as needed. And then the business of ward boundaries and county commissioner boundaries can be completed. And one I heard that was new to me was the Met Council district. So I'm going to have that as a follow-up. So I learn something every time. The legislative boundaries, February 15th, 2022, the last 2 cycles in 2002 and 2012, basically the same point in time, 25 weeks prior to the primaries, the courts issued maps. So we're kind of in the same pattern. And then you've got that limited time for the city and the county, March 29th. So that's about 6 weeks after, and about another 20 or days after is the county's deadline. And then important to know that the county commissioners approve the county redistricting, city council members do the city, school boards where they do that. People get very focused on state redistricting, Congress and the legislature, because that's where all the attention is, and those are certainly important. But I think, and as Jennifer talked about some of the things that the county does, and just knowing that the commissioners are going to be talking about redistricting tomorrow, I was looking at the agenda, and you see all of these things on the agendas for the county about transit, transportation, things like the Gold Line bus transit, medical services, mental health services, public health. Those are all on their agenda. Social services, juvenile services, law enforcement, public safety, jail, juvenile detention, infrastructure, roads, bridges, sewer, trash, all those things. And I heard Commissioner White in the candidate forum last year, one of my favorite discussions ever in the candidate forum, where they got into talking about the details of trash collection and landfills and all of that. And it was great. So all those things are county functions, and people do not appreciate the importance and the magnitude of the county's responsibilities. Local redistricting, able to engage and contact your local officials, and then a greater opportunity for influence. Or you really, really want to promote that idea of being engaged in that redistricting. Those things going on, I appreciate the openness of the commissioners and the staff on this in Washington County. Believe it or not all counties are that way. A number of counties are much less transparent. I would just say I work with many leagues throughout the state. And so we hear a lot of things, but there are things like they're training staff, they're assembling data. All of the census data required for redistricting is out now and available in the various tools. And then you have that timeline. Some things that are challenges differ between counties. Most local governments are not accustomed to a lot of public involvement and interest. Some not here, but in a number of places, local government officials are resistant to public involvement. Believe it or not, there was one county commissioner told some constituents he thought it was against the law for the public to provide input. That is not true. There are very limited requirements. So while they're important around equal population and adhering to precinct boundaries, there aren't a lot of requirements on how those lines are drawn in law. And the other thing is, and this is an important thing for the League of Women Voters, is to engage local government on how that is going to work. And I emphasize to residents, to leagues, is you have to act now to be involved in and influence the process. Because as was stated, those meetings are happening now. They're happening now in many counties, many municipalities. White Bear Lakes Charter Commission, which draws their boundaries. They had their first meeting about 3 weeks ago on redistricting. The Minneapolis Charter Commission had their first meetings back in September. Other local governments are also working on this. This is also what Ms. Virginia said, and just gives you a perspective as you think about how would you draw these maps. And I really appreciated the map, the colored map with the different population changes of the cities and townships in Washington County. But it shows you that District 2, or Commissioner Karwoski is, that's 5,000 people under where it needs to be. It just hasn't grown as fast as the rest of Washington County. So that has to get bigger. The other part of Woodbury, if you live in Woodbury, you know that they've been building houses like crazy in Woodbury. Same goes for Lake Elmo, same goes for Cottage Grove. And so those districts, District 3, 4, and 5, have to get smaller. And so that is going to be important in deciding how those lines are drawn. And then for you as residents, and as we reach out to people, is what makes sense for areas to be included in those districts to provide the best representation of the interests of the residents of Washington County. What's important to the people of Forest Lake is very different than what's important to the people of Woodbury, probably Afton, probably different than Matamidi, and Cottage Grove, Great Cloud Island. So each one of these areas has different interests. One of the things I want to point out, and this is the same numbers that Ms. Virginia's had, and one of the things I look at is demographics. And it's not as dramatic in Washington County, but there still is a pretty significant difference in the demographics of different parts of Washington County. You see Oakdale is a third non-white. There's a lot of Hmong in Oakdale, especially the western part of Oakdale, northwestern part of Woodbury, that goes over into kind of the parts of White Bear Lake and parts of Maplewood, a large Asian American population there. So it's important to understand that those demographics and those policy interests are going to be different than what they are in places like that are different economic or social backgrounds. So how do you approach local redistricting? A couple of things to keep in mind. First, focus on the process. If the process isn't open, transparent, provide opportunities for input and comment, it doesn't matter how much other work you do. Like we're doing tonight, ask how redistricting is done. Ask the elected officials about opportunities for public involvement at the various phases of the process. And then do that review of the existing maps. I kind of gave you a suggestion. And then I have other suggestions that you could think about as you look toward providing input to the government. Look at how the maps are drawn. Look at what the needs in your area, your community are. Who else shares those needs, those interests? Go to the public hearings. Go in virtually. Go in person if you have the opportunity and ability. And the other thing is involve other community organizations. As was talked about, a number of people were really hampered by not having local media. So we want to make sure we're reaching out to other groups of people who may be less aware than us about how this process works, what the opportunities are, providing them resources and tools. I just put in the chat a link to our local redistricting action kit that the league has. That went live online last week. It's available to any member of the public to access and use. I welcome questions. I will speak to anybody, anywhere, anytime about this process and about this. As you talk to local government and the staff, remember this is something they only do once every 10 years. Fortunately, we have several commissioners and some members of the staff who've been involved in this before. In many places, You'll find people involved who've not been involved in this process. This is a part-time job. People have other things they're doing. There is an election coming up here in a few weeks. There's another election next year. And so they have other things they're doing. The staff is focusing on legal requirements and past practice. They are, based on some of those inputs from elected officials, creating other opportunities. But again, it's going to be up to the commissioners in the county's case. In the case of places like Afton, Stillwater, it's going to be up to the city council members about how that process is going to work. If it's going to be beyond what the past practice has been. For elected officials, I mean, maybe not so much in Washington County. They may not know the details. They may be deferring to the staff on how some of these detail works. They may not understand concept of communities of interest, how that goes beyond strict racial and ethnic or national origins, but other things from a social economic interests. And then make sure you talk to them with facts on the process and availability of data and be aware. And my last thing I'll leave you with when interacting with local government is be polite and persistent. People are trying to do the right thing. They want to do a good job. They have a lot of other things going on. And so you ask a question, people say they're going to get back to you. You know, wait a period of time, give them a chance, then follow up. So just being persistent, being present, going to hearings, providing your input is really, really important. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is for providing input on redistricting. This comes from a Brennan Center study and some suggestions. One is providing actionable instructions to the people drawing maps, in this case, the commissioners. It's something that's going to be effective and feasible, you know, and focusing on small areas, smaller groups is usually a lot more helpful, you know, so that they can incorporate that more easily into the final maps. So think about actionable suggestions on a neighborhood, a small city, a part of a city that has a particular set of interests that can be understood and acted upon. Define your community, and we can talk more about this in a separate discussion, those who are interested, and about its need for effective representation. And I can't tell you how often I talk to individuals who go, well, you know, I live in, and this person's on this meeting, and I live in this area. We're in this school district. I go, you know, this is a Stillwater school district. I go to Stillwater for a lot of my services. I go for medical exams, eye appointments, but yet I live in this northeast part of Woodbury. And I said, that's a great example of a community of interest. It's you live in one place, but you have a lot of your shared interests in services and where you go and where education opportunities are in a specific area that may not be the rest of the city of Woodbury. So that is a great example of your community and what's important to you and matters to you. Maps created using online mapping can really help. Providing a physical representation, again, is something I can help with. It doesn't have to be complicated. I've done this with literally dozens of community groups around the state. And it's something that can go with testimony and really make real for commissioners and staff what it is you're talking about. When you provide testimony, prepare for limited time, 5 minutes or less, and then build coalitions. Who else is around you? Talk to them, your friends and neighbors. So with that, just a brief snippet of what we're suggesting, what we have to offer from the League of Women Voters Minnesota to help you engage with the county, the city, if that pertains to you, in redistricting, so you can be effective in influencing what that final outcome looks like. So Andrea, thank you. And I thank Jennifer for her time and her presentation. I thought it was great, and the commissioner's comments as well.
Well, I've got one question so far, but as we know from before, sometimes they keep coming in. So if anyone has a question, it would be great if you could submit it to the Q&A that's on the bottom. It's a little bit easier for me to keep track of than in the chat, although I am looking there also. So the one question we have so far is, to your point on engaging local governments, how are the Woodbury Cottage Grove area local governments involved in the redistricting process?
Yeah, and I've talked to Woodbury a little bit, and the bottom line is not very, because there aren't wards in Woodbury. They are focused on the city. They are, they are letting the county approach redistricting. So that's really a separate process. They focus on redrawing precinct boundaries once the legislative boundaries are done. I think based on what I've heard, there's really limited involvement for Cottage Grove, Woodbury, Oakdale in that process.
We have one other question that's on about the state level redistricting process, but I know that you know about that too, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you about it. It's if the courts eventually have to draw the lines, how does one access the courts? I'm assuming that's a question about how does one provide public feedback if it is the courts drawing the maps.
Absolutely, and what you can do is you can provide written testimony to the court, and what I will also tell you is that there are court hearings scheduled through the 26th. I think the 21st, which is this Thursday, is the last of the in-person hearings. If you go one of the in-person hearings in the evening, those almost all run short. And so you will have time to testify in person if you go to one of the in-person hearings. What I did was I just put a link to our page that the League of Women Voters Minnesota has. There is a link there to the courts schedule, and you can provide written testimony to the court, and I will provide that link also for the court.
I was just looking for it to see if I could find that too, but I don't have it at my fingertips. But if I come up with it, I'll put that in the chat too.
That's the email address, state redistricting panel at court.state.mn.us, and you can change that. You can send an email to them to address that. And I appreciate, I see the comment in the chat, the judges don't listen to us. I don't agree with that. And the evidence is that the courts actually in Minnesota at least do listen to the people. The maps currently drawn in Washington County for the congressional seats are evidence of that. If you go 10 years ago, most of Washington County was in District 6. The feedback loudly to the courts 10 years ago was that really the center western part of Washington County, most of Cottage Grove, Woodbury, Oakdale, was much more like the metro, much more connected with St. Paul and then Minneapolis, from where people work, where people got services, where the demographics were most similar, what policy interests are shared. And so they drew the map, in the court did in 2012 to put that center part of Washington County into District 4 instead of District 6. I think that there's still a lot of desire from the court to hear input from citizens. And I trying to remember, I think somebody might have said that early in this, the hearings that I think it was before we started this, Ms. Wagenius was saying it, but the evidence from the questions is the court is really interested to hear what the residents of Minnesota want for their districts and what they are concerned about and where their communities are, because they know that they're going to get certain inputs from the political parties. And so then it's a question of what is in the best interest of the people within the bounds of what the court can do. So I do think there are people who want to tell you that the courts don't listen to the people. But I think there's evidence that they do, although there's limits on how much they can do because they have to take what's called a least change approach, where they're not deviating from making the maps legal into doing policy. So they will be limited how much they do, so they aren't making policy decisions. So I think that's probably the biggest limitation.
Without getting into a much larger discussion, I think sort of the ultimate question there is, are the courts the mechanism we should be relying on to draw the maps if the legislature can't come to a consensus? Or how do we make the process work better, which is a whole other discussion, but I don't know if you have an elevator speech for that.
Right. I mean, that's, and that's what we had been talking about up until this summer, which was changing the process, because the current process does not work. The courts are not by our Constitution or laws how this process is supposed to work. But it is what happens in Minnesota currently with divided government. So, stay tuned. That'll be our discussion starting next spring, is going back to changing how redistricting is done in Minnesota in some form of commission, so that it is at least one step removed from the legislature and all of the potential abuse party control can do on representation.
Right, I have one more question in the chat here. Said Minnesota was last in getting our boundaries. Will that happen again?
When you say last in getting our boundaries, you mean, is that keeping our 8th seat? Is that?
I am not sure, actually. So if the person who submitted that question wants to clarify, we can talk about that.
Yeah, I think if it's in keeping the 8th congressional seat, we are, I want to say 29 people in the census. From losing that seat, and New York was, I want to say 89. Yeah, I mean, we've been very close last cycle, very close this cycle. I think the positive for Minnesota, we do a good job counting. I think there's evidence that we were undercounted in college cities, undercounted in urban areas. A lot of evidence, at least to my looking at that and others. And then we have grown in the past through immigration. And I think that is, we'll just have to look toward the next 10 years and do a great job on the census again.
Yeah, I think that's probably what the question was. I don't have a clarification, but I think that's an important thing to note. So, as I imagine most people know, and we've talked about in here, this all follows the census. So this just goes back to our next census cycle, the importance of getting out, as many people to respond to that as we possibly can.
I see the question in the chat about respecting city and county boundaries. That's a really complicated question. The question is, sometimes in the suburbs, communities of interest don't necessarily follow city and county boundaries. And I talked about the Asian American Pacific Islander community, that there's really a pretty large community. If you look at southeastern Roseville, kind of southwestern Maplewood, southern Maplewood, western Oakdale, northwestern Woodbury, along that corridor, and that spans a county line, multiple city lines, but there's a pretty sizable Asian American community there. And so there might be an argument to be made to district that community together, because their shared interest from a state policy perspective might be more important than preserving the political boundaries. So, I mean, that's a trade-off to be made. And where those are, Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, North Minneapolis maybe share more from a shared interest standpoint than North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis, for example. So it's a matter of looking at what is the better representation, not just demographically, but from a policy interest standpoint, to say where would be the best district lines for representation. One where it doesn't work, Rochester is split in half, and that's not likely to be fixed. So anyway, the answer, precinct boundaries for caucuses, no. I would bet a steak dinner, wherever you want. That the legislative boundaries will be issued on February 15th. And I think the caucuses are like the first week of February. And this is the same thing that happened 10 years ago and 20 years ago, is that the caucuses had to re-caucus. And in some cases they had, and I've talked to people who are in that realm, that the parties would have to redo their caucus organizations and then redo the caucus. So I would say there's almost no chance that there will be boundaries before the precinct caucuses.
All right, with that, I don't see any other questions, so I will wrap it up unless you have any closing thoughts, Paul.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. And again, I'm really glad the commissioners were on. I really appreciate Jennifer being here as well.
Great, so I will, I want to just make a note before we completely close it out that our redistricting team from the Woodbury Cottage Grove Area League of Women Voters would like to invite you to participate in our call to action that I mentioned earlier, and I'll post a link in the chat here in a second, to support redistricting principles for adoption by the Washington County Board of Commissioners. We have some principles that we are proposing that I have mentioned, and we will have those available for people to share. So we also wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that, as we've talked about, that our Board of Commissioners did adopt principles in 2012 that not every county does. We also wanted to make sure with that call to action that we're thanking our county for having done that before and recognizing that that's an important step. And then we have a page. I'm just going to post this here in the chat. So, and then also this is going to go out in the email, the follow-up email for those of you who registered. So you'll get this information there as well. So there is the link in the chat. And I think that is it as far as the information goes for the call to action. So just keep an eye out for that. And then I'll hand it back over to Betsy.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for a fabulous evening, so informative, and obviously the topic is just critical to all of us. So thank you to our commissioners, to Paul, to Jennifer, to Andrea for facilitating. It really was excellent. I think you just did a great job. And again, it is on our, it will be on our website. So you'll be able to see the PowerPoint that was done if anybody wants to look at it again. Thank you to White Bear League for co-hosting with us tonight. It was a really wonderful opportunity for us since we're covering the north and the south part of Washington County, and as we've heard tonight, how long we are. So we really are trying to reach out to as many people as possible. I want to invite you all to save the date. November 15th, we have our all member thank you. Every Thanksgiving, is just a wonderful time for gratitude and pausing and thanking our members for all they do to help forward democracy. And then on December 4th, we have our legislative preview, and that is open to the public. That's a Saturday. And we have League of Women Voter Minnesota, Nick Harper speaking, and will kind of give us a sneak preview on what will be coming up with our legislative session. And then save the date, mark it down, January 29th, we have our legislative interviews, and that's probably our most popular program. It's really just a wonderful time to hear from our legislators about what they see as the important focuses for the upcoming legislature. The legislative session is a little later. It starts at the beginning of February. So that's why we're having our interviews January 29th. So again, thank you for being here and have a wonderful rest of the evening.